This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Catherine Shen. Data centers come in all shapes and sizes, from a few shelves in a university's basement to a warehouse the size of nearly 200 football fields. But what do data centers actually do? Do we have any here in Connecticut? Some towns across the state have expressed concerns about what a data center could do to their quality of life, while other towns look to data centers as a way to create new jobs. Today, we'll be covering data centers, from how they work to their impacts on energy and water infrastructure. But first, we'll get an update on the state of AI and what ethicists might be worried about. We're joined by Reid Blackman. He's the founder and CEO of Virtue, an AI ethical risk consulting business, and also author of the upcoming book, The Ethical Nightmare Challenge. Reid, welcome back to Where We Live.
Yeah, thanks for having me again.
And for our listeners, let us know if you use AI and are you concerned about AI use. Give us a call, 888-720-9677. You can also find us online at Where We Live or send us an email, wherewelive@ctpublic.org. So Reid, the last time we had you on the show was actually in 2023 when ChatGPT has just been released to the public. So very new, very different for many. But now, 3 years later, there's so much that has changed. Can you give us a sense of where we are now in terms of AI technology?
Yeah, it's getting crazy. That's the short answer. It's getting crazy. So yeah, right. When we talked last time, ChatGPT was out. There's other competitors out there now that are very popular, like Google's Gemini and Anthropic's Claude. And we think of these as something like very complicated chatbots. You have all sorts of conversations about all sorts of topics with those things. What we're beginning to see now is what's called the rise of agentic AI or AI agents. The way to think about this is that your chatbot, your AI chatbot, can do more than just chat. It can be connected to lots of different things. So the most obvious example is that now all of them are connected to the internet. So now you ask your chatbot a question and you have a conversation, and if it doesn't quite know the answer, it can do an internet search, and it does the search on its own. You don't see the page that it goes to exactly. And it pulls from those different websites, then gives you an answer. That wasn't the case back in 23, you said, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it can get connected to other tools as well. So if you're at your work, your AI might get connected to various pieces of software that you have. Maybe it's HR software, maybe it's compliance software, maybe it's operations software, whatever it is. And that's where we're headed, where your AI, the chatbot, gets connected to lots of different pieces of software, or put differently, lots of different tools. And so now you're dealing with this thing that people tend to call an agent now, that kind of acts like a person because they can reach out to different pieces of software and perform lots of different tasks.
And so you mentioned agentic AI right now, and you're an ethicist, and your work is on consulting regarding ethical uses of AI. So what are some of your top concerns? Were you surprised that this is happening, or is this sort of part of the process that you expected?
Well, I mean, I'm not totally surprised. I mean, I'm always talking to technologists and trying to understand what are they working on, why are they working on it, if they're working on that and they're successful, how do we extrapolate that? So maybe it was last January, actually. I remember distinctly talking to someone out of Google and on their research end, and she was explaining to me how they're connecting these tools. And I thought, oh, okay, I see where this is going then. So not a surprise. People wanted their chatbots to be able to do more stuff. So of course, they're trying to give it increased capacities. So it's not surprising. Does that answer the question?
Yeah,
I feel like I missed the first half of the question.
No, that answers part of the question for sure. Just to get an idea of were you expecting this to happen as we're going through this? And the other part of the question was, what are some of the ethical concerns that you might have?
Of course, the big part. Yeah, I only missed the big part that I'm a specialist in. So there are certain kinds of ethical risks that are persistent across all kinds of AI. So we've been talking for years about biased or discriminatory AI. The explainability problem, which is to say we don't understand why it's creating the outputs that it does. Lots of talk of privacy violations, including IP and copyright violations. That's the case with the AI that we were talking about before 2023, in 2023, and certainly with agentic AI. We also have things called hallucinations, which is true of regular chatbots, where they just make up false information. When we get to the world of agentic AI, remember that we're talking about an AI, let's say chatbot, to simplify, connected to lots of different tools. So we get sort of three big problems that come along with this. Number one, we have systemic risks. So there's nothing wrong with any part of the whole system, but something about how the whole thing works is problematic. The way that I like to think about this is something like a basketball team, even though I know very little about basketball. You can have individual players who are very good, but maybe one's really good at a fast game and one's really good at a slow game. And something about the way they play together makes them a bad team. And you have the same kind of thing with the systemic risk for AI. Maybe the AI is okay. Maybe the tools to which it's connected, they're all sort of on the ethical up and up. But something about when you put them together, they don't, so to speak, play well together. And you get biased outputs or privacy violations or hallucinations, et cetera. So that's one kind of problem. Second kind of problem, cascading failures or a snowball effect. So something goes wrong in one of those systems to which the AI is connected, or maybe something minorly goes wrong in the AI itself. And then that just leads to compounding risk. It's sort of the error echoes throughout the system, gaining momentum, gaining size like a snowball does, rolling down a hill. So that's the snowball effect. The very last thing that I'll mention is people talk a lot about autonomy. So what's distinctive about AI agents is that they're meant to be autonomous in the sense that you don't tell them step by step what to do. You tell them your goal, and they go, quote unquote, figure out how to pursue that goal using all the tools to which they have access. And you might worry, well, if it's doing all the stuff on its own, if it's making quote unquote decisions all on its own, couldn't things start to go sideways at the speed and scale of AI, which is tremendous? And we don't know necessarily have the ability to monitor it when it's doing those things. So we're not going to know when things start going sideways, and we may not know how to intervene. So the risk of autonomy, I'm not sure that it's a risk unto itself, but it certainly pours gasoline on the fire.
And so with the hallucinations or the snowball effect that you're describing, can you give us some examples of what these errors could look like? Because I feel like sometimes maybe you're looking at the thing, but you don't know that it's actually the wrong information.
Yeah, sure. So I mean, we could take a kind of relatively mundane but everyday example of customer service, something along those lines. So
Sure.
you call into a company, you want to get your whatever, you want to return the thing, or you're upset about the product or something along those lines. And from the company side, this might be a risk for the company more than the consumer. Maybe it hallucinates something about, makes something up about what the consumer asked for, or maybe it gets wrong the price of the thing. Maybe that leads to the system updating how it does refunds across the entire system. Maybe it starts giving out refunds willy-nilly to the great financial loss of the company, something along those lines.
Well, today, of course, our focus is on data centers, but AI plays a really big role when it comes to that. And many people have heard of both AI and data centers, but not everyone knows what their connections are. So, can you talk about how AI and data centers are linked?
Yeah, they're very closely connected. So especially with agentic AI, which is where everything is headed. So when you are using AI, first of all, that just takes up a lot of energy. Just to run these systems, the amount of compute it takes is great. And so you're talking about lots of electricity, and you're also talking about lots of compute. So you're talking about computer chips, you're talking about servers. Those have to go somewhere. So you put them in a data center. If you need a really big one, it's a hyperscaler data center. And these things also require a tremendous amount of water to operate, in no small part because all that usage of electricity causes a tremendous amount of heat. You need ways of cooling that center down so the sort of chips don't literally melt. And so you use water in order to cool it down in various ways. So that's just for regular, AI. But now when you start connecting it to all the tools, because it's agentic AI, it's going to be more and more compute connected to all these tools to engage in all these calculations across these dozens, hundreds of pieces of software, performing thousands, millions, hundreds of millions of internet searches. So you're getting an extreme amount of compute, which means that you need the chips to do it. So you need the servers to do it. So you need massive data centers.
And you mentioned hyperscale data centers just now. Is what's the difference between that and a smaller data center?
It's just size. I mean,
Mhm.
the smaller data centers, it's not just size. I mean, the largest of it has a big impact on things like its environmental impact, energy consumption, et cetera. So it used to be that you could have some servers in a non-AI setting, and you have to keep the servers cool. And so you have an HVAC system. You have a regular, more or less, standard-ish cooling system with which to bring the temperature down so the chips don't melt. But the quantity of compute that's going on with these AIs and agentic AI is so great, the temperature gets insane. Regular heating and cooling systems don't cut it. So you need to introduce other kinds of systems, including those that require a tremendous amount of water.
And we will be digging deeper into what those environmental impacts are throughout the rest of the hour today. And I want to ask, though, as you're talking about this and describing what they look like in certain communities, what are some concerns that people might have regarding these data centers?
There's lots. So we already mentioned the environmental impact, and I'll just talk about that more. I'll focus on some other things. So one thing is if these data centers are using a tremendous amount of energy, one that could impact the price of energy in that region. So if you're just, a local regular person living their lives, and then the data center's in your backyard, and all of a sudden energy is scarce, that means the price might go up, and so now you're paying more for your electricity, even though you're not benefiting from the presence of the data center in any obvious way. So that's one kind of concern: energy costs going up for the people who are in the locations of those data centers. Similarly, with water consumption, a lot of these places are built. What you want, among other things, is low humidity where you build these data centers, or that tends to be the case. Which means that there's not a lot of water around. So if they get built in places where water is already scarce, so water consumption becomes a problem for you. There could be things like noise complaints and the aesthetics, because you've got to build these giant data centers. They're running fans and things like that in order to keep things cool. So that creates a lot of noise. So those are some of the kinds of things that you got to worry about.
And
Oh, well, sorry, one last thing.
go for it.
Just the reliability of the electric grid, right? I mean, if they're drawing all this energy and there's a finite amount of energy, you get brownouts, blackouts, that kind of thing. And who's going to get prioritized when energy availability is low?
And it feels like we're seeing a lot of this in the headlines today, but these are certainly not new issues or new data centers are not a new thing, really. What do we know about how these data centers are regulated and run?
Not much. I mean, there's not much around this. I mean, it's really what I've seen so far is states and cities sort of scrambling to create, moratoriums or bans on things for a short period of time. There's not that much. There are other places that are trying to figure out how do we sufficiently compensate the general community for the water consumption and energy consumption by these data centers. As far as I know, there's not sort of the way that it gets done. There aren't, I mean, we don't have federal regulations around these things in any substantive way that I've seen anyway. Even if there are some regulations laying around that we could apply, we'll see what, it's all going to get played out in court anyway. So it's not clear how they'll apply. So it's sort of, it's a battle. It's a battle at the moment.
Well, and you mentioned too, a lot of these data centers are built around communities, and a lot of these communities tend to either have lower resources or lower average income. And when this does happen, usually the data centers are built without any or very little community input. So, is there a more ethical route to building these data centers, especially as we learn more about it and going forward with it?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that one thing that we need to be clear about is, for instance, things like, will this create jobs? So one of the arguments for creating the data centers in those communities is that it's a job creator. And it is true that these are massive facilities that require a good deal of construction, which means that you need construction workers. And so it does employ, from what I gather, could employ thousands of people, but it takes, call it 1 to 2 years to build the thing. And after that, these data centers are mostly automated. And so you still need people, but we're talking about hundreds of people, not thousands of people. That's what I understand the research says. And so, okay, so what does it look like to be more ethical? They need to be transparent about what job creation looks like, not just in the short term, but in the long term. And there needs to be those companies to be clear about the kinds of financial burden they're going to shoulder when it comes to increased energy costs, increased water consumption, that sort of thing. There also needs to be greater care paid to things like, what do traffic patterns look like, right? So are they going to destroy the way that traffic patterns work in the city? Is it going to cause traffic for some reason? Even if it's in the first 2 years of building the thing, what's that going to do? And at the end of the day, you need collaboration and you need representation of the people serving on the design boards of these things.
Are you seeing that collaboration and representation from the companies who are trying to build these data centers in communities?
Well, I haven't seen it myself, but to be fair, this is not. I don't do deep research on this. That requires a level of empirical research that I just don't do. That's pure journalism, I think. I think that I know that there are ways that the companies have been reaching out to the various communities. There's been town halls, et cetera, et cetera. It's unclear to me how much of that is PR and how much of that is genuinely looking to get community feedback, and let alone maybe they listen, but do they actually do? I think that's TBD.
Well, and this is certainly a topic that's been talked about a lot, I think, in all communities and in different, social media platforms. It's a conversation that I think people are having more and more in their daily lives. So, from where you're standing and what you're hearing, and with the people that you're talking with, what are some things, or what can communities or individuals do to ensure more ethical AI usage?
It's a demand by the culture in general. So, I don't think it's. I mean, if we're talking about AI writ large, it has to do with communities pushing for certain kinds of requirements. My own view, this is after spending lots of time trying to build AI ethics programs for companies, is I think we need to specify what the nightmare scenarios are. I think if people say, listen, here's what the nightmare scenarios are. We are terrified that our electricity is going to increase beyond our ability to pay it. We're terrified that there or it'll be a nightmare situation in which there's not enough water to go around because these things are soaking up. It's a nightmare situation where the trillion-dollar companies building the data centers are benefiting a great deal, while the communities in which they build these data centers don't benefit at all, and in fact, they suffer harm. So I think getting clear about what the nightmare scenarios are and more or less demanding from these companies, hey, tell us exactly what you're going to do in order to avoid these really bad outcomes. I think that's sort of the way to go. Individual posting on, I also think something like it's got to be coordinated, a coordinated effort, or at least that has to be part of the picture. Just sort of posting a rant on social media is not going to cut it. It might be satisfying, but I think the communities coming together, potentially protesting together, writing letters together. I think that's going to be necessary.
Is that something that you're seeing at all from communities or individual people getting involved, finding solutions?
I don't think they know the solution necessarily. I think that the companies don't necessarily know the solution. Um, it's not like there's the solution. It depends on the context. It depends on what the particular benefits are going to be. It's going to depend on how are they going to build the data center, where they're going to build it, with whom they're going to build it, and that's going to be very context sensitive.
And I know we talked a lot about worries that you have about the future of AI or future of data centers, but what's exciting you about AI? Because it's here to stay, people are using it, and there are benefits.
Yeah, so I am not someone who thinks the sky is falling. I think really bad things could happen, but I'm also confident that we can avoid those bad things. What we're dealing with are phenomenally complex engineered systems that do pose dangers, but so do nuclear warheads, and so do nuclear plants, and so do commercial jets, commercial flight. So we can do really complex, high risk things safely if we put our minds to it. So I'm confident that we can. In terms of optimism overall, I actually think AI is amazing. I mean, I use it literally on a daily basis. It does a great deal to sort of co-run my business. Agentic AI really is amazing. The capabilities are incredible. You can do the kinds of things that you couldn't do before in hours. You can do things that would have cost you tens of thousands of dollars that now cost you maybe $20 a month subscription to some of these services. So especially at least in a work context, I think that, and especially for small businesses, I think small businesses stand to benefit a great deal. I mean, these giant corporations, yes, they can benefit, but they're really big ships, and it's hard to do big things with these big ships in anything like a short amount of time. If you're a small business, and I have a boutique business, my boutique consultancy myself, if you're a small business, there's a lot that you can do to leverage AI to push your business down paths you wouldn't have been able to do before because you couldn't afford it. Whether it's, PR or sales or whatever it is, product development. There's just a tremendous amount you can do now that you just couldn't do before. And if you don't know how to use AI in order to help your business, go ask AI. Go say, hey, here I live in New Haven. This is my business. Here's what my revenue looks like, or here's the kind of revenue I'm trying to get. Here's what my customers look like. I'm trying to think about expanding it here or there. And you could have a conversation with it, and it's going to get some things wrong. It'll say some stupid things, but it's also going to say some pretty smart things. And then you can keep asking it, great, how do I continue to use you in order to take advantage of that business opportunity? I think there's lots of that around.
Well, I definitely echo that. I have some friends who do have boutique businesses as well, and they have talked about how helpful it has been using AI, but also recognizing a lot of risk and challenges that it can come with too. So we'll appreciate you sharing that aspect of your perspective, Reed. You've been listening to Reed Blackman, who's the founder and CEO of Virtue, an AI ethical risk consulting business, and he's also the author of the upcoming book, The Ethical Nightmare Challenge. Reed, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
We want to hear your thoughts on AI. Give us a call, 888-720-9677, or find us online at Where We Live. This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Catherine Shen. There are around 50 data centers here in Connecticut. None are what are known as hyperscale data centers, which many span over 1 million square feet, with nearly half the size of the city of Springfield. Are companies interested in building larger data centers in the state? And if so, where might they be? And how will they impact Connecticut residents? To answer these questions, we're joined by Jordan Fenster. He's a reporter with Hearst, Connecticut, covering artificial intelligence. Jordan, thank you so much for being here today.
So much.
And we're also joined by John Moritz, who's a reporter for CT Mirror, covering energy and the environment. John, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
And for our listeners, let us know, what do you think about data centers coming to Connecticut? Love to hear from you, 888-720-9677, or send us an email at wherewelive@ctpublic.org. So, Jordan, can you give us an idea or a rundown on the state of AI and data centers here in Connecticut?
We have a bunch of not only data centers, smaller size data centers in Connecticut in various places, but also some companies that develop the infrastructure around data centers, including what I think of as the pipes that connect data centers to each other. So there's a lot of, and of course there are larger companies and organizations, Yale, for example, UConn, research organizations that are using AI in very incredible ways and are requiring that very high level of computation. But what we don't have, as you said earlier, is the big hyperscale data centers. So we're seeing smaller data centers build across the state. There was an attempt to build one up near the Millstone power plant, actually connected to the Millstone power plant, that failed, I think, because of community involvement, community opposition. And that's where we're at the moment.
And John, what are you seeing?
Yeah, so as Jordan mentioned, one of the projects I think many people may have heard about is the Millstone data center proposal. That's a term that we often hear about when we're talking about data centers, especially now with regulation that's co-located. Because these centers require so much energy, there's a push to have them be located adjacent to a large power station such as Millstone, which currently provides about a third of the electricity that we use here in Connecticut, so that it essentially can plug right into the power station and use its electricity without having to build, a long network of transmission lines that would be costly for the development.
And so, Jordan, it seems like there was a lot of excitement about data centers here in Connecticut from the government, and I think it's kind of died down a little bit. Do you have a sense of why this happened?
I wouldn't want to speak for the governor,
Sure.
but not in any way. But I get the feeling that, like a lot of new technologies, there was a lot of excitement initially. AI presents, as Reed said earlier, a lot of opportunities. And Connecticut really does want to position itself as an innovation hub. And so there was a lot of excitement a few years ago about what that offers, both for jobs and for education. And then I think some of the realities of what that looks like, some of the things that Reed already talked about, the incredible need of the water cooling systems that are necessary, perhaps even air cooled systems have some environmental concerns. They don't there are a lot of jobs created in the initial build, but there's not a lot of long-term jobs. You need maybe 5 people to run a pretty large data center long-term in a giant warehouse. So, I think there was a lot of initial excitement that when the realities started showing themselves, people rightly pulled back from.
Well, and Jordan, in your reporting, do you get a sense that people understand the connection between AI and data centers? As Reed kind of mentioned earlier, there's a lot of interplay happening here, but do you get a sense that people do understand what's going on between the two?
I really don't think people understand data centers at all. I don't think people really understand AI very much at all. Of course, that's not true across the board. There's a huge wide range of knowledge, but people do tend to think data centers are disconnected from what they do every day. In fact, they are very, very, very connected to what we do every day at work.
John,
right now.
Curious to hear, John, what are your thoughts on what Jordan just mentioned, and your thoughts about sort of the connection between the two and people's awareness or knowledge of it?
I'm not really an expert or sure of how people are making the connection between the use of AI and data centers. I do know that there's been you are seeing a groundswell of both public and that's translating into political opposition to data centers. And a lot of that has to do with the concerns about how it will impact things that people rely on every day, such as energy and water. You asked earlier why we're seeing kind of not the growth of data centers that we may have expected a couple of years ago. I think that really comes down to a problem that everyone in Connecticut, I think, is very familiar with, which is the price of our electricity. And that's something that's region-wide. Throughout New England, we have some of the highest electric prices in the nation. And if you're a data center that needs 100 megawatts of power at all times to run, that's the size of a small to mid-sized city. Mm-hmm. And you have to buy that power just like me or you would have to buy that power. And that becomes a cost burden on these developers. So when you look at the places in the country now where these data centers are going, it's really places like Virginia, the Sun Belt, where they have had historically much lower energy prices.
Well, and Reed had shared earlier sort of the infrastructure, the general infrastructure needed for data centers. If we're looking at a place like Connecticut, can you give us an idea of what are some of the infrastructure demands of data centers that would be needed? And we talked a lot about the electricity would be, I think, one of the biggest impacts for residents. What are some other impacts that could potentially happen?
So going back to the co-located aspect of it, we've seen in other states, one of the things the developers have done is they've purchased actually defunct or abandoned power plants and restarted them as a way of providing power. There are Connecticut, we have a lot of older oil peaker plants. I haven't specifically heard of any proposals to locate data centers there, but there are some older facilities that could potentially house that type of infrastructure. Secondly, if you don't co-locate, one of the big concerns is you would have to build a network of transmission and distribution wires, and there's a question of who would have to pay for that. So currently, the way we have the system is set up in Connecticut, electrical utility infrastructure, the cost of building and maintaining that infrastructure is paid back by the utility customers. So there's a real concern, and this is something that I think politicians both at the state and federal level are trying to get a handle on, is if that utility infrastructure needs to get built, is that something that would be borne by the developer, or would that get pushed back onto the ratepayers?
Well, I just want to bring up an example just to get a better idea of how the impacts could look like. So it's based on data from the Library of Congress, and if we're imagining if a hyperscale data center, so a much larger data center, is built here in Connecticut, it would use over 1% of the state's total generated electricity. So with that in mind, what kind of impacts might that have on a Connecticut resident?
So certainly if a data center were coming in and essentially sucking up some of the additional capacity, that would raise costs. The expectation would be that would raise costs on consumers. There has been a push, including by our U.S. Senator, Senator Blumenthal, that would require data center developers to come online and build essentially bring their own sources of energy online so that those data centers wouldn't be sucking off of power that's currently needed to meet grid demand.
And Jordan, with your reporting, are you hearing from people who are expressing concern or excitement, or what are some general thoughts that you're hearing from people that you're talking with?
With regards to data centers, I think a lot of people have a lot of concerns. I'm not sure if all of it is grounded in reality, but with regards to AI, I think a lot of people, what Reed was saying earlier and what you were commenting on, is the people are very excited about AI. Executives are very excited about AI from an efficiency standpoint, and I wonder, and I think the question is how it'll make money once those data centers are built, once that capital expenditure is done. How will AI make money is a question that has yet to be answered. But there is a lot of excitement, a lot of possibility. I'm personally super excited about the vibe coding. I neglected to learn to code more than basic HTML, and AI gives me the opportunity to build things that I never would have had the opportunity to build in the past. And I think that a lot of people are experiencing the same sort of sense of freedom.
Well, I would just share that I'm part of the generation that learned how to do very, very, very basic coding by being on MySpace. So that was sort of my exposure to coding. That certainly was not ever a part of my education. So certainly can see and feel the excitement. And I kind of want to get a better sense of how the general public is responding to the paucity of data centers coming to Connecticut, or even just AI in general. I do want to take some calls here. First, here is Karen, who's calling in from New Haven. Karen, you're on the air.
Hi, I just want to say that when the AI functions each time, the underlings get hurt. That's what I heard on National Public Radio. And the way it happens is that trolls around the country, it gets the best answer. Then it takes it out of context and spins it. And then the people don't know it sounds good to them, and they don't know what's wrong with it.
Well, thank you so much for your comment, Karen. I'm going to pose this to both Jordan and John. Any thoughts of what Karen has to say? I feel like it echoes a little bit about what Reed was sharing earlier, where you get a lot of information from ChatGPT, for example, but you kind of have to be able to parse out what's real and what's not. Jordan?
She's really getting at a really important question. And photographers in the news business have been complaining about their photos appearing on and being, stolen off of the web since the beginning of the web. And, so a friend of mine, I cover cannabis a lot in Connecticut, the business of cannabis. And a friend of mine just started looking up cannabis in Connecticut on ChatGPT, and it pulled a lot of my content and didn't give me any attribution and didn't give it any sort of context. And so I think that she raises a real concern that information, the value of information, is not really trickling down to the people who actually provided that information to the internet. And then, as Reed said, it gets things wrong because it doesn't actually understand what the world is. It only pretends to, or tries to. So I think she raises a really interesting question.
Well, the fact that you have this real life example, I think, is pretty telling. John, do you have any experiences in your own sort of reporting or anything to add to what Karen has to say?
We do use AI in our reporting in certain aspects, for scraping data, going through large voluminous files of information we get. But, our current ethical codes, require us to double check and verify all that information. And I don't necessarily know that everyone who has access or is using this is doing so appropriately.
Well, before we go to a break, I want to take another call. Peter, who is also calling in from New Haven. Peter, you're on the air.
Hi, I was calling because I became aware of a study out of MIT recently about AI sycophancy and AI psychosis. The study essentially looked into how AI sycophancy was affecting people and how their, general view of themselves was being affected. It showed that AI over half of the time was giving sycophantic answers, which often were against a moral standpoint, and that the LLMs, the sycophancy is essentially built in and that it's unavoidable. Even if you put a user warning above to the user, or if you tell the LLM to not be sycophantic, it's the way that they're built that essentially causes them to act that way, which can cause psychosis in people.
Well, thank you so much, Peter, for your call and your comment on the experience. And this is certainly something that we have discussed in conversation about sort of the role of ChatGPT and the user and how a relationship is created when you're having these conversations with a chatbot. So I'm curious to hear from both John and Jordan if you have anything to add with what Peter just shared. Jordan?
Just that these are large for-profit companies that created these AIs. They bake in that attitude because they want us to continue using their product.
Anything else to add, John?
No, I haven't read the paper that he was referencing. So.
Gotcha. That is fair enough. And thank you so much for your call, Peter. Appreciate it. And you've been all hearing from John Moritz and Jordan Fenster. They'll be with us after the break. Let us know if you've been impacted by data centers. Tell us about it, 888-720-9677, or find us online at Where We Live. This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Catherine Shen. Today, we're taking a look at data centers here in Connecticut and beyond. With us is Jordan Fenster with CT Insider and John Moritz with CT Mirror. And let us know if you have any last-minute questions about data centers. Give us a call, 888-720-9677. So I want to kick off this segment by sharing a comment from Matt, who commented on Facebook. And he says, I'm quite familiar with the data center topic in Connecticut and the Northeast in general. They do attract jobs, talent, and tech companies. Many of the large organizations in Connecticut used to operate data centers here. The biggest problem here is the cost of electricity. That's the number one reason they left, and that needs to be fixed. This is a much larger discussion than AI. In my opinion, data centers make much more sense than the explosion and built out of built distribution centers for retailers like Amazon and others. I personally feel it would be beneficial to the state as a whole to make Connecticut more data center friendly. Thank you so much, Matt, for sharing your thoughts with us. I'm curious to hear, Jordan, what do you think about what Matt just shared, considering, there are centers that has come and gone, maybe not do big retail centers like Amazon and then dropping data centers there instead. Thoughts about how that can benefit the residents here in Connecticut?
A real belief out there, and there's an argument to be made that if you want Connecticut, if you want to encourage innovation, if you want to encourage business, if you want to encourage economic growth, you need to have the infrastructure here in order to build, in order to build that sensibility around the state. And the argument against that is that these are all cloud-based things, and that the nanoseconds that it would take for the information to get from Virginia to Connecticut does not warrant the cost the environmental cost, for example, of putting such a large data center. But that is an argument. There is an argument to be made that if you build it, they will come.
Well, and John, we've been talking a lot about sort of the concerns that electricity rates that are already high will get higher if we do build more data centers here, and but excitement for potential jobs to come in. What have we heard from power companies like Eversource and Millstone regarding these data centers? Are they interested in having hyperscale data centers here in the state?
So I actually did have a conversation with an official from Eversource about a month ago, and they echoed a lot of the concerns that I think they're hearing from their ratepayers, which is about the cost. Now, one of the things that Eversource expressed to me is that they don't feel current regulations allow them to reject a request for interconnection if it were to come through. They can place certain stipulations on that. For example, they say, if a large hyperscale data center comes online, they need to pay their own way in terms of any transmission distribution upgrades that we talked about earlier that might be needed. They want to see the developers pay those costs so that they would not be passed along to the customers. But they have expressed concern that there's not really a clear federal regulation at this point that would give them the ability to say, yes, we can handle this, or no, we can't. And I think that's one of the things they want. They have not weighed in specifically on the legislation that I mentioned earlier that has been proposed by Senator Blumenthal and Senator Hawley out of Missouri that really seeks to tamp down and set clear rules on some of these data center developments.
Well, and the Millstone nuclear power plant has been mentioned a couple times here and as a potential or a viable site for a data center. What makes a site more viable than others?
Yeah, so it's really the amount of power that's available there. So Millstone is the largest power plant in the state. It provides about a third of our power, and importantly, it's nuclear power, so it's always on. It kind of runs at a consistent clip. Unlike wind and solar, which we hear about, sometimes the weather or amount of sunshine can affect those. But even natural gas in the wintertime, our natural gas supply is severely constrained by the pipelines. And if a developer or a data center were to require or to run entirely off of a natural gas power plant, their costs or their access to power could be curtailed at certain times of the year because of that.
Well, and kind of switching the other way around, is there interest in building more nuclear power plants, nuclear energy plants in the state, or other infrastructure that could potentially provide more power to support data centers?
Yeah, I mean, we've heard a lot of talk, I think, in Hartford about interest in nuclear power. Whether that goes anywhere remains to be seen. I mean, the last kind of real effort that the state took was essentially asking towns to raise their hand if they are interested in playing host to a nuclear power plant, and to date, none have. Now, Waterford, which is currently host to Millstone, has a good relationship, my understanding, with the Dominion, which is the owner of that plant. And there's been a lot of talk about potentially putting a technology called small modular reactors. The idea that these would be smaller than kind of the full-scale plant and could be built at a cheaper cost. But when you talk to Dominion, which is the owner of the power plant there, they operate out of Virginia, which is a fully regulated state, which provides them a little bit clearer pathway towards recouping costs of development of new power plants. And they've expressed that their interest in building these smaller reactors is in states that have similarly fully regulated utility environments. Connecticut, along with the most of New England and the Northeast, has a deregulated environment. So I don't think there's a lot of interest, at least for the time being, there.
Well, and Jordan, I'm curious to hear too if you are hearing from any local municipalities who are raising their hands and wanting to build data centers here in Connecticut.
I mean, Norwich is an example. I spoke to Mayor Singh there. It's one of a few communities that has their own dedicated power, as John will tell you. And I think that is the real difference. Is if they are not connected to the larger grid or not dependent on the larger grid, they're more open to having larger data centers come in. I think that makes the difference.
And are you seeing any other legislation recently regarding AI and data centers? Well, the AI legislation that I'm most interested in these days is not data center related necessarily, but the relationship between how employee protections against AI is something that I'm really watching very carefully in Hartford right now. And John, kind of same question to you. What are some legislations you're seeing coming down?
Yeah, so there's two bills specifically dealing with data centers that I've been following. Both have actually passed out of committee in recent weeks. One, we didn't talk about earlier, but the state in 2021, I believe, passed some tax incentives to try to lure data center developments. To date, only one developer has actually been approved for those incentives, and there's a bill out there that would actually repeal the tax incentives as of July 1st. There's a separate legislation, also came out of the Energy and Technology Committee, which would kind of establish a more clear process for what I was talking about earlier, of co-locating, requiring these large hyperscale data centers to come online with their own independent source of electricity. And in my conversations with lawmakers, I think that's the one that at the moment seems to have a little bit more traction to it.
Well, I mean, kind of building on that more broadly, can you tell us about energy sustainability in the state?
Yeah, so Connecticut is part of the ISO New England, the New England electric grid. So I think when we're talking about electricity demand and output, it's often better maybe to think about it on a more regional basis. We are a net exporter of electricity, so Connecticut produces more electricity than it uses. But the price and the way that electricity is distributed is really done at a more regional level. And we so even if there were a lot of data center developments in, for example, Massachusetts or New Hampshire, that could have an impact on us here in Connecticut because it could constrain the supply of electricity that's available on the larger power grid.
Well, and Jordan, we started off by talking about AI ethics today. Are you seeing any current legislation or projects that are discussing more ethical uses of AI here in Connecticut?
Again, the worker protections, I think, is a good example. I forget who told me, but AI is not regulated at all from a legislative perspective, nationally or on a state level, and so I think that's the direction where what you're really going to see is this attempt to ethicize AI, to try to restrain it, or maybe that's not the right word, to try to make sure that it doesn't run roughshod over people's rights, and that we don't allow companies to use AI to run roughshod over people's rights.
Well, and for yourself, personally, or as a reporter, what worries you about the future of AI technology, or are you excited about it?
Excited about AI. Like I said before, I'm doing some fascinating stuff in my private life, I'm coding Raspberry Pis and, doing all sorts of interesting things that I'm just loving. And I'm super excited by. What worries me, honestly, is who's making the decisions. For example, I'm not convinced that executives understand where the AI's limitations, and that they will rush into trying to replace human jobs with AI before AI is actually ready to do so. That's where I'm really concerned.
Well, and John, kind of similar question to you. Are you excited or worried about the future of AI technology?
I think it's something that we're going to be seeing. We're going to be dealing with and seeing how it plays out and impacts our daily life for decades to come. And as Jordan mentioned, there's a lot of concerns about how it impacts our workplace, potentially taking human jobs, but it could also impact things, as we talked about, that people might not necessarily connect to AI, such as the cost of your utility bill.
Right. And what are you working on next?
To be determined.
All right. Jordan, what are you working on next that we can look forward to?
Oh, geez. I'm working on 10 things, as always.
Well, I'm glad to hear both of you are keeping busy, and we'll have to do a follow-up on this. We're certainly going to keep a close eye on it. You've been listening to Jordan Fenster, who is a reporter with Hearst CT covering AI. Thank you so much, Jordan, for joining us today.
You.
And you were also listening to John Moritz, who's a reporter for CT Mirror covering energy and environment. John, thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
I'm Catherine Shen. Today's show is produced by Isaac Moss. Our technical producer is Dylan Reyes. Download Where We Live anytime on your favorite podcast app. And thank you all so much for listening.